body shaking. Try to take it higher. Dance, dancer. You gotta move on. Dancer, if you wanna feel good. Dancer, keep your body shaking. Dancer, try to take it higher. Come on, come on, yeah. Come on, yeah. Just dance. You never knew the power of your body. No, no, no. But when you keep on dancing to the music, you reach up high into the sky. Just dance. Dance, dance. Dancer, just dance. Dancer, dance, dance. Just dance. Dance, dance. Just dance. Dancer, just dance. Dance, dancer, just dance.
I was born by the river in a little tent. And oh, just like a river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know the change gon' come. And oh, yes, it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die. 'Cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know the change gon' come. Oh, yes, it will. I go to the movie and I go downtown. Everybody keep telling me, don't hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes, it will. Then I go to my brothers and say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down on my knees. You know, there've been times that I thought I could last for long, but now I really know I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gon' come. Oh, yes, it will. Yo, for real.
She can wear a laugh or maybe shout out loud. She's so young, she wants to be. When she sleeps, you could see an angel in her smile. She doesn't know broken dreams sing a song for her. I am happy like I never was. Going on.
Good evening, attendees of the Frederick Douglass Awards Dinner. Please begin to find your seats. Our program will begin momentarily.
She's got the low. She's got the low, 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 low. She's got the low. She's got the low, 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 low. She's got the low. She's got the low, 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 low. She's got the low. She's got the low, 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 low. She's got the low. She's got the low, 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 low. She's got the low. She's got the low, 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 low.
What I've gotta do, what I've gotta do, oh baby. What I've gotta do to make you love me, oh baby. What I've gotta do to make you
Good evening, good evening, good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? Now, it's more than y'all than it is me, so how about we all stand to our feet for just a moment and celebrate the amazing work that is the Southern Center for Human Rights. Thank you all so much. My name is James Major Woodall, and I am honored and pleased to be a public policy associate at the Southern Center for Human Rights. And I think I can speak on behalf of all of my colleagues to say that it is such a pleasure to come back to D.C. once again to celebrate with each and every one of you. You know, we are currently in the midst of a crisis where human rights are literally being challenged at every way we turn. And so the work that the Southern Center for Human Rights does is very key and critical to the survival not just of organizations and efforts and initiatives, but more specifically and most importantly, to protect and preserve the lives of actual human beings. And so the work that we do and the support that you give ultimately helps us to do just that, which is to save lives. But I can't really talk about saving lives without actually showing you the people that do this work day in and day out on behalf of so many people. And so without further ado, one of those people, or persons rather, that I would like to bring up is none other than our board chair, Alan Garrett. Let us welcome him as he comes.
Good evening. My name is Alan Garrett. I'm the chair of the board of the Southern Center for Human Rights. Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Southern Center for Human Rights 27th Annual Frederick Douglass Awards Dinner. We're honored to have you with us as we recognize Ruth Friedman, a former Southern Center attorney, and founding director of the Federal Capital Habeas Project, and Earlonne Woods and Nigel Poor, co-authors of the book, This is Ear Hustle, Unflinching Stories of Everyday Prison Life, and co-creators of the Ear Hustle podcast. We also recognize and appreciate you for your critical support of the ongoing efforts of the Southern Center. I'm deeply honored and humbled to have been named the latest chair of the Southern Center Board of Directors. During the 15-plus years that I have had the privilege of working with Southern Center, I have been continually amazed at the tremendous ability and extraordinary work ethic of the attorneys and staff of the center. They defend those who would not otherwise have counsel. They develop and litigate civil cases targeted to provide the greatest impact to the most disadvantaged. And they engage with lawmakers and the community at large to shape a more just future. And throughout all these efforts, they treat their clients, each other, and even the most difficult opposing counsel with dignity and respect. As we witness widening inequality and increasing injustice, the center continues to exemplify the ideal of a true selfless commitment to a better world. Thank you for coming here tonight, for believing in the center's mission, and for making it possible for the center to continue to do its work. I want to extend particular thanks to our sponsors. Our luminary sponsors include Morrison & Forster, we were happy to welcome a new board member, so thank you so much for your continued support. Susan and Jeffrey Sussman again, and Jake Sussman and Jessica Flaxman, so thank you. Our champion sponsors are King & Spalding, Munger, Tolles & Olson, and Northrop Grumman. Our benefactor sponsors are Covington and Burling, also wonderful board members. Jenner and Block, longtime board members as well. Shepard, Mullen, Richter, and Hampton. Steptoe and Johnson. The Feminist Forever Fund, thank you. Dave DeBruin and Elizabeth Taylor. James and Mary Kate Garland, and Mary E. Schlegel. So thank you all. Our reception sponsor is Mayor Brown. And the Defender sponsors are Arnold and Porter, Kay Scholler, Reed Smith, Wilmer Cutler, Pickering, Hale and Dorr. I'm sorry, these mergers that have happened in my lifetime, I have to remember. Zuckerman Spader, Mary Broderick, James Kwok and Sylvia Brandt, Elizabeth Samil, and James Thompson. You may find a complete list of tonight's sponsors in our program, so thank all of you. We are also pleased to have a number of special guests with us this evening, including Richard and Juliet Ogletree. If you would stand, or you don't have to stand. You can just thank you so much. We have two former executive directors of Southern Center, Sarah Tatanchi and Steve Bright. I know we have some judges and dignitaries here. I do not have an updated list, but if you would either stand or raise your hand, we will acknowledge you. So. I'd like to acknowledge my fellow Southern Center board members. If you could all stand briefly, present or former. So let me clarify. I want to especially thank the 5 board members rolling off this year after many years of service to Southern Center. Mike Kaplan from Kaplan Cobb down in Atlanta, Dave DeBruin from Jenner, Ronan Doherty from Bondurant, Chris Stewart, who I know I saw earlier this evening, and Jim Garland. So thank all of you for all your great work. Last but not least, I would like to recognize Southern Center's incredible attorneys and staff. Please stand and thank all of you so much. Now I have the great privilege of introducing Terrica Redfield Ganzy, the Executive Director of SCHR and a true modern-day hero. Terrica graduated from UVA Law just a few years after me, very close, just a few years, and made the very different choice after graduation to turn down a large law firm offer and to instead accept a fellowship at the Fair Trial Initiative at North Carolina. From that moment forward, Terrica has dedicated her life either to representing capital clients or to serving in critical leadership roles to facilitate and grow quality legal representation for capital clients and other clients who otherwise would not have a chance at equal justice. SCHR has been by far the largest beneficiary of Terrica's extraordinary dedication to the public interest. From her 9 years as a staff attorney in Southern Center's Capital Litigation Unit, to her extraordinary success as Development Director for Southern Center, to her time as Deputy Director under Southern Center's wonderful longtime Executive Director, Sarah Tatanchi, and last but not least, to her current role as Executive Director of Southern Center. In the interest of time, I'll direct you to Terrica's biography at schr.org, where you should go all the time. If you inadvertently click on the donate button, just go with it, don't fight the feeling. To see some of her many accomplishments and accolades over the years, as well as her current leadership roles with the Georgia Association of Black Women Attorneys, the Georgia State Bar, and the Judicial Council of Georgia. Without further ado, please welcome Terrica Redfield Ganzy.
Thank you, Alan, for that kind introduction. I feel like I'm being loud. And thank you for everything that you do and you give to improve the lives of the people we serve. You are a gift and a treasure, and we are so grateful to you. I, too, want to recognize the Ogletree family present with us this evening. Thank you, Richard and Juliet, for being with us tonight. Professor Charles Ogletree contributed so much of himself to make the Southern Center for Human Rights the formidable force that it is. And we are very proud to pay tribute to his life and legacy this evening. I want to especially recognize my predecessors, Sarah J. Tatanchi and Stephen B. Bright, for being here tonight. This event always feels like a family reunion, and having them both here really makes it feel like home. Congratulations to our honorees. We pride ourselves at Southern Center in recognizing people and organizations that are in the trenches, doing the necessary work. And tonight we're excited to celebrate you, Ruth, Nigel, and Earlonne, for who you are and for all you give to our communities. Finally, thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Some of you have been supporting this event and supporting the Southern Center for many, many years, and we cannot thank you enough. To those of you who may be here for the first time tonight, thank you. Thank you for choosing us. We hope you leave inspired and uplifted. These are uncertain times. Inflation, wars, a retrenchment from the understanding that diversity and equity are worth striving for. The rewriting of American history such that ugly truths are whitewashed, and the list goes on. During these uncertain times, we are called to stand, to hold the door against rampant injustice, cruelty, and racism. SCHR's mission is perhaps more vital now than ever. The challenges we face are immense, but they are not insurmountable. We know we can overcome them because we've seen it done before. As Mary McLeod Bethune proclaimed, if we have the courage and tenacity of our forebears, who stood firmly like a rock against the lash of slavery and the disruption of Reconstruction, we shall find a way to do for our day what they did for theirs. At SCHR, we believe in the power of empathy, understanding, and fairness. We refuse to be passive spectators in the face of a system marred by inequity. We hold firm against the forces of prejudice and discrimination, unwavering in our commitment to create a world where justice knows no bounds, where compassion triumphs over cruelty, and where every person is treated with dignity and respect. We are confronting systemic racism, challenging cruelty, and amplifying the voices of people who the criminal legal system would crush. We are defying the status quo, questioning the normalization of dehumanization, and building a society where everyone, regardless of their race, background, or economic status, receives fair treatment under the law. Someone asked me recently why I do this work, and I took a few seconds because really, where do I begin? But here's what I eventually said. I said, I find the way that the system inherently values people based on how much money they have unsettling. How is it possible that living in poverty is itself a crime punished in some of the harshest ways, tearing parents away from children, stealing hopes and dreams, and creating cycles of despair that continue throughout generations? I am horrified by the ways that the system continues to target and oppress my people, not just Black people, not just people who are encountering the criminal legal system, but my family and my friends. My father, my grandfather, my husband, my brothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, just too many people to count. And one might say, there must be something wrong with that family. But one would be wrong. Because there's nothing wrong with us. There's something wrong with the system that would set good people up to fail, that would make going about our daily lives a crime. Listening to my brother tell me without emotion, that he gets stopped by the police so often that it's become routine. Just something that happens in life, like going to the grocery store, or me worrying that my 14-year-old son will soon be next in line for this kind of profiling. These things make the oppressive nature of the system all too real. Being targeted should not be normal, but for so many people it is, and I am disgusted by it. I am outraged by the inhumanity of it all. Our tendency to throw away people is awful, and it is maddening. And I believe that we can do better than this, that we can be better than this, that we deserve better than this. And I am determined to play my part alongside many others in working towards better. Each of us at the Southern Center has our own why, and oftentimes it is intensely personal. We do this work because we must, because if not us, then who? Who? There has never been a time in history where it's possible to wait out injustice, to just sit around twiddling our thumbs and our fingers, waiting for injustice to tire of being so horrible. Injustice does not yield, and it does not cower, and neither can we. Any positive change that was ever achieved was achieved by people who believed in things that they could not yet see, and who had the audacity to insist that they had the power to make that change a reality. That's the spirit that we, you and I, must lean into now, because when the work involved is fighting for our lives, there's no such thing as giving up. So yes, these are uncertain times, and I'm going to give you just a little bit of snapshot of what we're confronting in this system. Our client, Daniel Smith, is serving life in prison, having been convicted of killing his infant son. But there's just one thing, though. New evidence is indicating that his son died of natural causes, brought on by premature birth, supports what Mr. Smith had been saying all along, that he's innocent. Last December, the Georgia Supreme Court reversed the Superior Court's denial of Mr. Smith's extraordinary motion for new trial and remanded the case for an evidentiary hearing. However, the prosecutors are engaging in unprecedented tactics to avoid the evidentiary hearing and get Mr. Smith to plead to a crime that he says he did not do. So now, even though the state recognizes that Mr. Smith should be free, it is continuing to litigate to keep him in prison because it doesn't want to admit that it sent an innocent man to prison. We often see the same approach in our death penalty cases, where the state insists on trying to execute, to kill, to murder our clients despite serious problems, including innocence, race discrimination, or evidence that our clients have severe mental health issues. But we will continue to fight injustices and stand up for fairness, dignity, and humanity. Our policy team has been studying the Atlanta Police Department's use of force, using data that they've gathered from its use of force dashboard, and what we found is truly shocking. For example, police violence is at record levels since 2022, despite or perhaps because of racial justice uprising that condemned police violence that resulted in numerous dead Black bodies. Our project is supported by the families of people killed by the Atlanta Police Department. 100% of unarmed people killed by APD are Black. APD has had more racial disparities in use of deadly force than 83% of police departments nationwide. And the Atlanta Police Department uses a quota system. Its incentivized quota system encourages traffic stops, which is a disturbing practice given that national data shows that 30% of police killings occur during traffic encounters. Through town hall meetings and community conversations, this project centered input from community members and resulted in 7 policy solutions that are currently being considered by the Atlanta City Council. We are being solutions-oriented because that's what these times require. Finally, I will leave you with a video that tells the story of our work in partnership with Kaplan Cobb and the Georgia Advocacy Office to protect women experiencing horrific conditions in a local Atlanta jail. Litigating prison and jail conditions continues to be a pillar of the work that we do, and after you watch this video, you'll understand why. But before I take my seat, I must share with you a synopsis of a recent case that we lost at the trial court level. Oftentimes after our arguments or trials, we provide the rest of the team members with an update of how it went. And so we had a hearing in our capital protester case last month, and based on the facts and the law, we were surprised when we lost. So senior attorney Jerry Weber provided the following summary to his team. He said, "We argued, we lost, we were stunned. The trial court granted the Attorney General's motion to dismiss and invited us to take the case to the Georgia Supreme Court. We will do just that." The "we will do just that" part is the part that I love because that's the part that makes the Southern Center so special. We fight until we win, and then we fight to keep protecting our wins. So thank you. Thank you for ensuring that we can fight through these uncertain times and fight for as long as it takes. Thank you.
For over 46 years, the Southern Center for Human Rights has worked to ensure equality, dignity, and justice within the criminal legal system in the Deep South, agitating for racial justice and pushing back against a carceral system that seeks to silence the very people it purports to protect. Imagine being confined to a space no larger than a parking spot.
Solitary confinement is a severe form of punishment within our prisons and jails. I think the best way to think of solitary confinement is basically as a prison within a prison. We've been looking at solitary confinement for years here in Georgia because we've seen an uptick in its use in prisons and jails across the state. And what we're seeing is that the same race disparities that impact who's arrested and who's put in jail and who's prosecuted in our courts impact our prisons and jails. And what we're seeing are that Blacks and other people of color are far more likely to be placed in solitary confinement than white people. And not only that, they are far more likely to spend longer periods of time in solitary confinement. We also see people who are experiencing psychiatric disabilities, people with mental health diagnoses who are placed in solitary confinement at disproportionate rates. And the sad thing about solitary confinement is that precisely because people are locked away in cells that are no larger than a parking space for 22 to 24 hours per day by day, week to week, month to month, and in some places year to year. These solitary confinement cells only exacerbate, they only worsen their conditions.
This is the reality faced by women with serious mental illness held in torturous conditions of solitary confinement at the former South Fulton Jail in Union City, Georgia.
We learned that there was a crisis in the ways in which people were being held in jails pre-trial, unable to get out. People were being arrested precisely because they were having a mental health crisis, or because they were standing on the street and they were seeking money. And they were being arrested for the most minor offenses, criminal trespass, pedestrian on a walkway. And they would go to court, and a court would see their minor charge and see that they would pose no public safety risk if they were re-released, and then the court would issue a bond. But of course, our clients did not have money to begin with at the time of their arrest. And everyone seeing the circumstances of their arrest knew that. But because they couldn't pay themselves out of jail, because they could not afford to pay bond, they just languished and sat in jail.
In April of 2019, the Southern Center for Human Rights and the Georgia Advocacy Office filed a lawsuit on behalf of these women, some of whom were caged because of petty offenses. Kaplan Cobb joined the effort very soon after as we fought for immediate improvements in the jail.
Kaplan Cobb first heard of the South Fulton jail case when Southern Center needed additional assistance for the preliminary injunction hearing. Kaplan Cobb wanted to partner with Southern Center on this case. One, because of the importance of the nature of the matter. These women with serious mental illness were being deprived constitutionally required out-of-cell time, but also because Southern Center has always been a true partner in any of the cases that we worked with them.
It was clear to us in meeting with women in this jail that they needed advocates to amplify their voices and to amplify their experiences. They were hidden from sight. They were hidden from view. They were locked away in solitary confinement, and their stories were not being told. So we stepped in to demand accountability and to demand that these women get a fighting chance so they leave this jail able to continue on with their lives instead of leaving in worse shape when they arrived.
The result of Kaplan Cobb and the Southern Center's work in this case was that we obtained a favorable settlement that required defendant to provide minimum out-of-cell time requirements, track those requirements to ensure that they were actually in compliance with the settlement agreement, as well as to provide additional services to those women impacted by these bad practices.
Another outcome of this case was that a judge said that these conditions were repulsive. After seeing pictures of bodily fluids covering jail cells and cell hallways, and hearing from a woman who had been in the jail before and her discussing how she definitely had a mental health condition when she came in, but she knew she was getting worse, and she got sicker and sicker and sicker precisely because of this state-funded building. This judge was moved to order that this jail do better and actually follow the law. When I would step into that jail, a lot of the women in that jail look just like me. And for me, this case signals to the county, to this country, that we can't continue to criminalize mental illness. We can't continue to criminalize race. And we can't continue to criminalize poverty. We have seen solitary confinement at the South Fulton Jail, but we've seen it also at other facilities. And across the board, people are suffering. But we can, at the very least, agree that using barbaric practices that make people worse and that harm our ability to really protect the public have to go.
At the Southern Center for Human Rights, we are committed to people who are fighting for their dignity, their humanity, and their lives in the face of barbaric, inhumane conditions of confinement. From arrest to incarceration, their courage and tenacity push us every day to find a way. We are working towards transformation, and we are united with our clients and partners to build a better world. Join us.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. It's very appropriate that at this dinner we remember Charles Ogletree. He presided over most of our dinners for probably 30 years with grace, with humor, lifting us up and calling us to do more and better than what we were doing. We're honored to have with us tonight, as you've heard previously, Tree's brother Richard and his wife Juliet. I had been at the Public Defender Service in Washington here about 2 years when Charles Ogletree came. And we had a fairly good reputation of providing good representation for clients accused of crimes. But when Tree came, he took it to another level. His charisma, his ability to relate to clients, to witnesses, to juries, most importantly, and quite often, were really quite remarkable. It was a big event in the courthouse when Charles Ogletree was giving a closing argument or cross-examining a witness. I remember one time early in Tree's time at Public Defender when I went to see him in juvenile court and he was giving a closing argument, and I thought to myself, this closing argument would be quite appropriate to a jury in the trial of the century. But this was a juvenile case before a single Superior Court judge. We got to be good friends, and in 1982, when Russell Cannon and George Kendall and Robert Morin and I decided to go south to deal with the death penalty, Tree was one of the most supportive people in doing that. He asked what he could do to be helpful, and I said, well, I'd really like for you to be on the board of this new organization that I was going to. And he not only was on the board, but he became the chair of the board right off the bat. And over the next 25 to 30 years, he was involved in our cases, in the administration of the center, in raising money to keep the center alive. He'd ask me from time to time, now, how long is my tenure on the board? And I would say, Tree, you've got life tenure. You know how important life tenure is and how people want life tenure? You've got life tenure. Well, not long after we got down there and found out that we had taken on far more than we can handle, running around like medics on a battlefield trying to stop executions, one of our funders basically withdrew about half the funding for the very modest budget that we had. And it really wasn't clear that we could carry on, that we might have to close down. And we got the idea, maybe we'll have a dinner in Washington. Because after all, we've got a lot of ties to public defender, and a lot of the public defender people have gone to law firms, and maybe we'll have a dinner. We had no idea what we were doing. We didn't even know you needed name tags. I mean, that's how basic it was. And Tree said to me, you know, you can't just have a dinner and have people come eat. You got to honor somebody or recognize somebody. Or you got to have somebody give a speech. And I said, well, Tree, what are we going to do? You know, how are we going to do this? He said, I'll tell you what, I'll get Leon Higginbotham. I don't know, many of you may not know, but for those of you that do, you know that Leon Higginbotham was one of the great giants, a great legal historian who wrote 2 books on race and the law, chief judge of the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, partner at law firms, really just a remarkable man. And he came and he spoke, and we recognized him, and it was quite a success. We survived. We were actually able to double the salaries of people at the center from $8,500 a year to $16,000 a year. And by the time Tammy's son got there in 1978, we were paying everybody $20,000. We were in clover. We were still driving around in that, one of the donations to the Southern Center, Ed Loring is here, in the Open Door community. It was a homeless shelter. Gave us a car. You know, you're really fairly far down on the philanthropic food chain when you're getting donations from the homeless shelter. But we were getting them, and we sallied forth out into the South in that car as best we could. And when Tree was hands-on in our cases, I mean hands-on. James Ford was sentenced to death in Georgia at a trial in which the prosecutor used 9 out of 10 strikes against African Americans. James Ford, a black man, was tried in a case with a white victim of a jury that had only one African American. And the case was sent back after the Supreme Court decided the case of Batson versus Kentucky, which said at least if the prosecution discriminates like that, they have to give reasons. But the Georgia Supreme Court said, well, you don't have to give reasons in this case because there's a procedural rule that we're invoking here to prohibit any hearing on this issue. And we said, wait a minute, you can't invoke a procedural rule retroactively. It didn't exist at the time of the trial. The Supreme Court took the case, and Tree argued the case and argued that point to the Supreme Court of the United States, and it reversed, saying that the court could not. 9-0. But I want to make this point. When that happened, it didn't mean that James Ford wasn't under death sentence anymore. All it meant was now he was going to get a hearing on the question of discrimination in jury selection. And a lot of lawyers, having accomplished a great victory at the Supreme Court, might have walked away from that case right then, but Charles Ogletree did not. He went down to Coweta County with us, with Brian Stevenson, and he and I went down there. Art Mallory, the DA, got up there and gave all these preposterous reasons for striking the African Americans. We argued it, but the judge down there is probably hungover from drinking the night before and as hateful as any judge I've ever been before, denied us. So one more time, we had to go to the Supreme Court, and again, Tree, Brian and I, and they reversed the case. And James Ford is alive today because Charles Ogletree stayed with that case. In 2016, Tree told us that he has Alzheimer's disease. He said he was going to fight it, he was going to educate people about it, but we had no idea how fast, how devastating, and how cruel that disease was. Many friends of Tree remember him each year by participating in the Walk to End Alzheimer's and contributing to an end to this terrible disease. Last Saturday, the Tree Champions of Liberty raised over $42,000, the most of any team in the Alzheimer Walk. We will remember him, we will celebrate him, and we will continue to fight this disease on his behalf. Good evening.
Let's give another warm of applause for not only Mr. Bright, but also Mr. Ogletree and his legacy. Next, we will have the presentation of the Nigel of the Frederick Douglass Equal Justice Award by Maya Chaudhuri. I had to make sure I was going to get that right. Maya is a staff attorney in the Special Litigation Division at the Public Defender Service here in D.C., and she first joined Southern Center in 2013 and was a senior investigator in the Impact Litigation Unit before attending law school, and she returned to Southern Center as a legal fellow in the Impact Litigation from 2022 to 2023. Without further ado, Maya.
One of the most important things that I learned in my time at the Southern Center for Human Rights was the importance of storytelling, and also the number of stories of incarcerated people that go untold. Tonight, we are honoring two people who have made significant changes on that front. When Earlonne Woods and Nigel Poor launched Ear Hustle in 2017, it was the first podcast launched from inside a prison. And Earlonne served as the host from inside from San Quentin Prison. They've won Webby Awards, been nominated for a Peabody and a Pulitzer. They've written a book, This is Ear Hustle. But most importantly, they have spent the past 6 years and 100 episodes telling the stories of people who are inside prison and creating a platform for people in prison to tell their own stories. The podcast has been listened to tens of millions of times. And we've heard people share their memories from life before incarceration, describe what it's like to live in a prison, including what it's like to experience solitary confinement, and share their goals for the future. With this podcast, Earlonne and Nigel have provided a window into the lives of people in prison. And with their storytelling, they've changed how people around the country and the world think about the criminal legal system, understand prison, and also start to realize the hopes and dreams of people living in prison. Beyond the people on the outside who are impacted, I've also met people inside prisons who hear Ear Hustle and hear themselves. They hear stories they can relate to, and I find that so remarkable. I am honored tonight to present this year's Frederick Douglass Equal Justice Awards to Earlonne Woods and Nigel Poor.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We are thrilled to be here to have our work on Ear Hustle recognized by the Southern Center for Human Rights.
Yeah, it's amazing and a little bit surreal. Yeah? Are you nervous?
Definitely surreal.
Are you nervous?
No, I'm not nervous at all.
I am.
I'm not on trial. It's a particular honor to be up here tonight with Ruth Friedman,
Yes.
who is doing the very difficult work and the concrete work of challenging of the death penalty here in the United States.
Yeah, it's such important work, and we really admire what you do.
Thank you. Definitely appreciate you.
Yes. So, Ear Hustle is a podcast that the two of us created together in 2015. At the time, Earlonne was incarcerated and serving a life sentence, and I was a visual artist volunteering at San Quentin State Prison. And at first we thought we were making this show for people who were incarcerated. Our big dream was to have it played inside all of the prisons in California. But very quickly, the reality became larger than the dream. And it now has been heard by millions of people, both outside of prison and inside of prison. How many million? You know, he's the numbers dude.
Over 80 million. Definitely. And, you know, our work is very different from the hard work that y'all do here. And we try our best to continue doing it as best as possible.
Yeah, I mean, we really focus on the seemingly small stories. We don't typically talk about policy or national statistics. Instead, we really focus on the everyday, kind of the small stories. For example, nurturing critters in prison. How do you find a pet on the yard, like a snail, and take care of it? And that kind of story is really a story about finding love and giving love in prison.
You always gonna have somebody taking care of critters inside a prison. The Birdman, somebody. And we try our best to give meaningful life in an incredibly challenging environment like solitary confinement, on death row, or after receiving a sentence of life without the possibility of parole in prison.
Yeah, we also do stories about self-expression. For example, how do you take a state-issued prison uniform and change it up so it expresses something about who you are? Or how do you take a horrible prison cell and turn it into a place that you can feel safe, if possible? And those may seem like trite things, but they're not. They're expressions of an individual finding a way to be heard and to be seen, not as a number, but somebody that is creative and has a life and deserves respect.
Damn, Nigel, you didn't read nothing. Since our very first season, it's been amazing to see how small stories can have real impact. When I was in prison, of course, I didn't have access to the internet.
You didn't.
But people would write me letters on paper, and I heard from hundreds of free people, including judges and lawyers and self-professed throwaway-to-keyers. People who had conservative views of the legal justice system, all of whom said that our stories were changing their views. And I believe the stories we tell on Ear Hustle humanize people who are often dehumanized in the incarceration system.
Yeah, and what's so special about this honor tonight is that to us, it's a recognition that small stories actually matter and that they can help lay the groundwork to affect change on larger, more difficult issues. And one goal of Ear Hustle is to bring people to the table who really haven't spent too much time thinking about these issues. And I hope through our stories we can draw them in to start caring about the criminal justice system and seeing it in a more complex and deeply troubling way. And through that, hopefully engage them in making change. So what we do sometimes feels small to us, but we hope that the work that we do supports the much heavier lifting that you all do, and that you can see it somehow as a collaboration.
Definitely. So thank you all for the work that you do and for including us in this incredible group of current and past awardees. When we go to San Quentin State Prison and the California Institution for Women and other prisons, you know, we will be telling them about what happened tonight, telling them about all of you, and I can tell you firsthand how meaningful it is to have individuals fighting for them. So,
Can I go off script for a minute?
Of course.
Yeah. One of the things about Ear Hustle that Earlonne and I talked about when we started it was a really important way of expressing that people who are incarcerated and people who aren't can get together in a professional way and work together to create something meaningful. And I hope that's a takeaway from Ear Hustle. And so Earlonne and I have known each other for 10 years. We've been working together for 10 years. And I love this adventure. I hope we have at least 10 more. And I love you, partner.
Definitely. And we're at like 96 stories right now. We're closing in on 100.
Yeah.
It's definitely been a fun adventure to continue, like I say, to humanize people. And again, we definitely thank y'all for all the work that y'all do.
Yeah.
It means a lot to individuals in those cells because y'all are the hope, you know, and definitely individuals hope to one day be out again. So definitely thank you. We appreciate it. We appreciate this award.
I know. Thank you for the award.
Thank you.
Good night.
Our next speaker will be presenting another Frederick Douglass Human Rights Award, and that speaker is none other than Cathleen Price. As she comes, she is a civil rights attorney, a litigator, an advocate, a trainer, a consultant, an educator, but most importantly, a freedom fighter. Without further ado, Cathleen Price.
Good evening. I think I was introduced as a lawyer, so I'm going to talk. Terrica said I could have more than 3 minutes, and we're talking about Ruth Friedman, so I'm going to tell it all. I'm so pleased to get to introduce you, Ruth. You are one of the most important women in my life. It's tremendously satisfying to see you receive this award for your work in the world, and I'm going to discuss that. But first, I want to talk about Ruth, the non-lawyer. I first met Ruth in 1993 when I arrived at what was then the Alabama Capital Representation Resource Center. I was there for a midwinter internship. The Southern Center said I couldn't come, et cetera. I was late. My father had an event. He was in the hospital. I was late, and I was late. It was dark when I got there, so I was late that day. And I'm being introduced to everybody in the office by our other wonderful colleague, Lawana Davis, and I'm brought to your office, Ruth, and you were digesting the state court opinion in the case of Clyde Cade. It was a shameful opinion, and you were working. And Lawana introduced us, and you turned to me and you said, "Hey, how's your dad?" I went on to stay at EJI for the next, in one form or another, for 30 more years, okay? And I continue to work in the world of capital punishment in defense of people who have been sentenced to death, and so much of it is because of your welcome that day. Okay, let's back up. Ruth Friedman has been a lawyer since 1988. She graduated from Yale Law School, you know, law review. Before attending Yale, she had fled Long Island, to Harvard, where it's really very cold. It's cold there now, but back then it was really cold. It was so cold that she took some breaks and spent some time away from Harvard in Brooklyn, where the cold is mitigated by interesting people, not true at Harvard. Anyway, she managed to finish college and in a way that got her into Yale Law School. At Yale, aside from, learning to love the law, she also indulged her love of Latin. Ruth is a Latin scholar in addition to, she's a Latin queen. She's a legal queen, she's a Latin queen. Ruth said to me once, I like to do things with words. Latin, we'll come back to this. She was influenced at Yale by the work of Robert Cover. Robert Cover was ending his academic career when she was there. His scholarship addresses the relationship of law to genuine social justice, including racial justice. He taught us that legal interpretation is always a violence, and that true justice requires us to account for that violence. Cover, quote, lived in this world even as he dreamed of better worlds. When Ruth Friedman speaks of Robert Cover, her voice changes. In 1988, she graduated from Yale and came south to what was then the SPDC. That's how I learned it, the Southern Prisoners Defense Committee, the predecessor name of the Southern Center for Human Rights. She joined what, from my perspective as a slightly later lawyer, was just a pantheon. It was the avant-garde. It included people in this room. It included Steve Bright. It included David Bruck. It included Henderson Hill. It included Brian Stevenson, Dick Burr, George Kendall. All of these people were doing the work that Steve alluded to earlier. At the time, we were in the reascendance of the death penalty, and all of the supposed constitutional protections were being tested. They were being tested in actual prosecutions, in actual appeals, in actual litigation. And this was the avant-garde in defense of those tests. So these lawyers, to me, were a battalion. And in addition to the warlike litigation in state and federal courts, they deployed what was known, or what I learned, as client-centered advocacy. Client-centered, which means that you reach in your work the fullness of the client and not merely the legal problem. Remember Mr. Cade I mentioned? Mr. Cade was a profoundly mentally ill man. He was, later the federal courts described him, or the experts in the federal courts described him as one of the most profoundly ill people I have ever met. Specifically, Clyde Cade was paranoid. Not lay people paranoid, but clinically paranoid. The quote that I remember was, Clyde Cade wakes up afraid, he lives all day afraid, and he goes to bed at night afraid. People, he was not afraid of Ruth. Client-centered. So this brings us to Ruth Friedman, the lawyer. In 1989, a few of the attorneys from SPDC moved into Alabama. Brian Stevenson was one of them, and Ruth was one of them. And they brought the focus of the work into a separate organization that was just dedicated to the Alabama cases. Alabama had a comparatively large row and a comparative scarcity. Well, it was scarce everywhere, but a different dearth of opportunity for representation. And I got there, as I said, in 1993, and as a result, I was brought along as a lawyer by the lawyer, that is Ruth Friedman. Have you seen a Ruth Friedman pleading? She was what my father would call a heavyweight, okay? She is no joke. She thinks so carefully, and it is relentless. You want it to relent. It is relentless. Her legal work is not just technically masterful, but it's a thing of beauty. You will be schooled by some Ruth Friedman pleadings, okay? But she's nice about it. I mean, again, I met her as a 23-year-old. You asked me to research something. I don't know the question anymore, but I found a case on point, perfect, disposed of the issue in our favor. I was like, here. And she said, quote, great, is that good law? And some of you are too young to know what I'm talking about, but I shepherdized it. And so it was good law. Shepherd, I didn't say reversed. Shepherd said affirm. So I said, yeah, I shepherdized it. And you said, yes, it was affirmed, but is that good law? That's a Ruth quote. It was affirmed, but is that good law? And I was like, yeah. I knew to go back and look. Well, no. Abrogation, I think they say this now on Lexis, but you had, anyway. And I was so ashamed. And she was so nice. She said, quote, oh, everybody does that. This is not true. Okay. But this brings us to Ruth Friedman, the teacher. Specifically, can we talk about the editing? Have you ever had Ruth Friedman edit one of your pleadings? Did I mention the Latin? Oh my goodness. I actually love being edited. I like to write, and David Bruck knows this because you also want David to edit you. But but you have to be ready because she does not play, okay? And this, I wish I had them to frame, like the editing with a pen, and the notes, the Latin. Oh my goodness. Anyway, but then you learn. Ruth the teacher, you learn. Because make no mistake, your stuff is going to be fixed. The claim is going to be fixed. The organization is going to be fixed. And all of the holes in your argument, the ones that you were, she just went head on. That's a good lawyer, people. Someone that doesn't shy away from the problem. And let's face it, most of our cases have got some problems. This brings me to Ruth in court. Fearless. A lot of people in the room are fearless. and this is some woman to woman. Like, I grew up watching you not be afraid of judges. Once I watched you turn your back on a judge, but in a way that wasn't disrespectful. The judge was okay with it. I guess I'm saying, control of the courtroom, control, okay? Not afraid of what the case calls. One time, Ruth had a hearing on a Monday morning, and the Saturday morning before, she came into the office, and accidentally, all of the exhibits, this was paper then, they got thrown in the garbage. She spent the weekend at the dump looking for the exhibits. I think Mr. Stevenson was with you for that. Traipsing through the garbage, looking for the physical exhibits, working with opposing counsel to get new copies of the exhibits that had been turned over. In federal court, this is normal. In state court, this is a miracle. State prosecutors don't do that. Monday morning, ready for hearing? Counsel's ready, Your Honor. That's Ruth Friedman. I won't go on in stories, but lawyers used to train through apprenticeship. You didn't have to go to school, you had to train. It's a trade in that way, and Ruth Friedman is a real lawyer. Like, she's a drum major for justice and a warrior, but she's a lawyer, law and facts. That thing, sometimes this gets attenuated in the social justice world. Not with Ruth, we're lawyers. Ruth's a lawyer, that's what we're here for. There are a whole lot of us today who wouldn't be half the lawyers we are if it weren't for Ruth Friedman, the lawyer. Beyond the guidance of her example of magnificent practice is Ruth's commitment to bringing along those of us that came behind you. It's absolute. I had an oral argument in the 11th Circuit, and I was facing Joe Flatt, and I was very afraid of Joe Flatt because when I first became a lawyer, Joe Flatt tore up everybody. Okay, thank you. And so the case was actually a decent case, but I was just terrified. Ruth, Brian let me moot once. Ruth let me come to, you remember this? I came to your house. Now, I ordered food, but she let me moot over and over and over again. Not the legal part, but just so that I could get up there and battle, because I was afraid my mother came. Okay, and I've seen you do that for lawyers behind me. I tell them, you better call Ruth. I speak for dozens of death penalty lawyers and legions of death sentence prisoners. Thank God for Ruth. In 2006, Ruth left state prisoner practice to start the 2255 Project. It's devoted to resourcing the unique needs of federally death sentence prisoners. 2255 Project, it's an exemplary startup, and I mean that in the Silicon Valley sense of the word. Young companies founded to develop a unique service, bring it to where the need is, and make it irresistible for customers. Well, everyone on death row knows who they better call, and it is not Saul. It is Ruth Friedman. They have her number, and they use it. She started the project solo and quickly built a strong team of top lawyers to assist death sentence prisoners in a multitude of wildly different jurisdictions. In this work, Ruth created and wrangled counsel for offenders. She assisted at a level of meticulous granularity. Remember the editing and the Latin? Pleadings and the nuts and bolts of litigation. She built relationships with judges. Ruth is good at relationship building. In service of educating the bench about the unique needs of this cohort of people in need of services. And during the terrible period between July 2020 and January 2021, a period of 6 months in which there were 13 executions, Ruth Friedman brought forceful and seamless leadership to a community of flattened advocates who were facing this. It was a tsunami of violence. Which brings me to something else. Anchoring Ruth's skills is her work ethic. Ruth, is the words of a friend of mine who knows you from Harvard, comes to work to work. Have you ever tried to get Ruth to do something in the middle of the day? She says, quote, it's Tuesday. I think I'm supposed to be working. Okay. Yeah, it's great. Remember the Cade? I was talking about Mr. Cade. I got there, and the decision had come down maybe the day before. You weren't grieving, Ruth. You were working. A lot of us, we grieve for a week. Like Robert Cover, Ruth dreams of better worlds, and she works at it. I noticed. I learned something from you. Okay, this is the last thing. I want to introduce Ruth Friedman, the woman. She's a person. In addition to working hard, Ruth Friedman actually works hard and plays hard. I'm a little younger than Ruth, and I quit going out during the week a decade ago. I have to go to bed. I get mad. I don't even want you to call me. Ruth will still go out on Tuesday. Something fun, food, she'll go out. She's all the way alive. She's someone who takes vacations. I mean, real vacations. Lots of them. It has to be warm. It cannot be cold. In fact, Southern Center, the reason that she came to you is because you're in Atlanta. No, I'm serious. She was looking at CAP, the California Appellate Project. CAP is in San Francisco. If you've ever been in San Francisco in the summer, it's freezing. It's an abomination. Ruth was in San Francisco in the summer. She called Brian Stevenson at SPDC from a payphone on the pier at the wharf, cold sea breeze, and said, the rest is history. And lastly, Ruth is sartorially vivid. You'll see how she's dressed tonight. You're going to be mad. Ruth wears bikinis. My second year as a practicing lawyer included a beach retreat for the whole staff of the Equal Justice Initiative, which is where I was working. It was family style. Those of you that worked in old nonprofits know what I'm talking about. Sleeping bags. We don't do that anymore. But it was old nonprofit. And you get the drill. I grew up in Colorado. I had never been in the ocean, and frankly, I was at work. I think I might have brought some shorts. But I definitely wasn't putting on a bathing suit in front of Brian Stevenson. Ruth, bikini clad, took my hand and walked me into the ocean, which was the first time I was in the ocean. And you held my hand while I found my legs, and I put my feet on the ground in the sea. And it sounds like a tiny little growth, but it wasn't. Years later, when I was preparing for my first 2255 evidentiary hearing, at this time I was not a young lawyer, I was a real lawyer, but I was the only lawyer on the team who had experience in this type of evidentiary presentation and this type of law. And we had like 70 witnesses, and I was also the lead, I was the learned counsel. And so I was terrified, and I was panicked, and I was howling. And I was howling to you. I felt by myself. I was not by myself, but I felt by myself. And I was screaming, and Ruth, I said, I'm gonna be by myself, and you said, I'll be there. We won. Like Cover, everyone in this room dreams of a better world. So much of what we know to do in service of that and how to do it is from your brilliance, your focus, and your care. Ruth Friedman.
I love that woman so much, and I have no idea who she's talking about. Don't ever tell Cathleen anything. Can I leave first? Okay, well, I'm going to tell you a few stories if I get my composure. Looking at Steve. Okay, back in 1987, in what I call the Paleozoic era, I was a student. I was a summer student at Southern Center. And that summer, Steve and the other lawyers took us to a training that they were having for local attorneys on the death penalty. And in the afternoon of that seminar, somebody raised his hand and said, okay, but, you know, would you still be against the death penalty if they didn't use it disproportionately against black people? The person who answered was Millard Farmer. I will not do an imitation. And Millard said, son, if that were the case, we wouldn't have a death penalty. And I was like, wow, these people see it and they say it out loud. Maybe I could work here. And so I did. That was a really, really long time ago. I didn't even know I did have those things. The world has changed a lot in 35 years. And in many ways, in really good ways. There's been real progress, if you think about it. And at moments like this, I think we do need to remember. The countries of the Soviet Union became independent. There's still a few wrinkles there. But Northern Ireland, the parties there put down their weapons, and there's peace. Nelson Mandela was released from prison, became South Africa's first president. The United States of America elected a black man as president, something I never thought I would see. Maybe equally as improbable as all of that, a longtime Southern Center for Human Rights lawyer was appointed to be a district judge in the Northern District of Georgia. That is a lot of progress. We who do criminal justice every day, we have reasons to be hopeful too. But there's so much that still has to change. For example, I want to tell you about one of my first clients at the Southern Center. He was a man named Albert. Albert was a black man on death row for killing a white man who showed up at the house that Albert was house painting. Albert had an IQ in the 50s, has an IQ in the 50s, and was a diagnosed schizophrenic. I met Brian at the Lafayette County Jail, where we were going to meet with Albert to prepare him for an upcoming hearing that we had. When we got there, we sat with Albert for a few hours, but he was not interested in our hearing. He wanted to know when we were going to get him his driver's license, and what could we do about, could we get rid of the bees that were buzzing around his head? There were no bees. When I left that jail, and I can see this like it was yesterday, I walked out into the Alabama sunshine and I burst into tears. I'd known Albert was ill, I'd worked up his case, I'd read all the documents, but somehow seeing him, he was so damaged, he was so impaired, that I couldn't quite put in my head this was the person the state of Alabama was using all of its power to try to kill. We won that case eventually. Not because Albert is so ill, not even because the state of Alabama struck every black person from the 3 juries that heard his case and made notations of why, but because it had also concealed evidence of someone else's involvement in the crime, which I luckily found in their files. So Albert was saved from death penalty. Unfortunately, today in 2023, there are lots of Alberts on death rows across the country, and I know you know. There's a man named Anthony on federal death row, a man with schizophrenic and vascular dementia. He puts feces on his cell, and he hasn't had an intelligible conversation with anybody for years, and ably represented by somebody in this audience that I can't see. The not very liberal Bureau of Prisons finally decided that it had to move him to a medical facility because he could not take care of himself in the tiny cell the size of a parking lot. He couldn't manage it. But has the US Department of Justice stopped its quest to kill Anthony? No. He is still awaiting his execution. So these intolerable practices, they continue on and on. In 1988, in the year between when I was a student and when I came to be a lawyer at Southern Center, I went to hear Steve Bright argue Amadeo Vizant at the Supreme Court. The DA in Putnam County had written a very cryptic memo instructing prosecutors on how to underrepresent Black people and women on juries, but to do it in a way that was constitutionally undetectable so the courts wouldn't know. Any law students here? That's intentional discrimination. Fortuitously, SPDC got hold of that document, and Steve won the case. 35 years later, my office, the Federal Capital Habeas Project, represents another Black prisoner on federal death row for killing a white man, a police officer in Columbus, Ohio. There are no cryptic memos lurking in those federal files because there don't have to be. When the federal government takes a case where the crime has happened in an urban jurisdiction, the makeup of the jury, the percentage of Black people and other people of color on those juries plummets. In Daryl's case, it dropped by half. This is a strategy we see over and over again in the federal courts, in St. Louis, in Richmond, Virginia, in New Orleans. We call it bleaching the jury. And then, of course, after that, the prosecutors strike the Black people who show up. I could tell you 150 stories, but I won't. Because there is good news. There's really wonderful news, too, in the 150 years that I've been a lawyer. Death sentences are way down from their peak. You know, in the 80s and 90s, there were 300-something death sentences a year. Last year, there were 21. Executions are way down. They're a fraction of what they used to be at the height of the death penalty's use. What's amazing to see is some people with very traditionally conservative values are speaking out more and saying the death penalty is inconsistent with notions of fiscal responsibility, and ain't that the truth? But also with a culture of life, of preservation of life. We are also seeing some more centric people who have evolved and are finding themselves really questioning the death penalty, and one of them, I think, is our President of the United States. And that gives us hope. It has to give us hope. It gives me hope. There's also real hope in the everyday. Just this week, last week, we learned that, where I got to meet with a woman who runs a very large organization for Catholic leaders. And there are so many things on their agenda all over the world, all over this country, but she is committed, and they are committed to trying to end the death penalty. And she is organizing people to write to President Biden and say, you have to actually really act on this. She was so inspiring. Sometimes hope comes from the really unexpected places. A couple of years ago, I got to meet the family of the victims in the case of a man that we were representing. She lost her daughter and her granddaughter in the crime for which our client sat on death row. For years, she very openly wanted him to die. But this woman let me into her house and into her life, and we talked, and we talked, and we talked. And this woman, who was an ardent supporter of former President Trump, she made a video for him, asking him to please commute Danny Lee's sentence. She then sued DOJ for trying to hold these executions during COVID. She lost, we lost Danny. And then, as Cathleen said, 12 more people. It was another time for tears and for anger. But it was remarkable to get to meet this woman. We are still in touch. She gives me hope. Last week, the Justice Department said it would not seek again the death penalty against another very mentally ill man who was under federal death sentence, who was 18 at the time of the crime, due to the tenacious work of his lawyers. And just today, I got an email from that lawyer saying he'd been sentenced to life. We sometimes still win in court. That's inspiring. If you want real motivation, though, keep coming to Southern Center dinners. About 5 years ago, I came to a dinner and someone ran up to me and gave me an enormous hug. It was Tony Amadeo, the person that Steve had represented at the Supreme Court, the first man under sentence of death I'd ever met. That can give a girl hope. I think all of us know hope is not enough, of course. It takes action. We all have to take action. I mean, if Earlonne Peterson, whose daughter and granddaughter were killed by my client, could ask to spare his life, I think there are a lot of things that the rest of us can do. We won't all start a podcast. We're not all that talented. But I'm going to throw out a few things, because really, why not? There are a lot of lawyers in this room, I bet. Raise your hand if you're a lawyer. Raise your hand if you're at a law firm. Oh, that's a lot of people. You are integral to change in our world. There's so much that you can do and you do. The average debt for a law grad coming out of school these days is $165,000. For black grads, 30% more than for white. You have helped people get fellowships to do this work. You've loaned lawyers to offices like ours to do this work. You've provided free legal help when we need it. And so many of you have taken capital cases and made such a difference. So I'm going to ask you, can you do that again this year? Can you do more of it? Raise your hand if you can. Here's another one, voting. We need to vote. We need to register people to vote. Make phone calls. Knock on doors. You want to learn how to knock on doors? Go work for the Southern Center. So true. If you can't knock on doors, write postcards. Drive people to the polls when they don't have cars. Voting is how we end up with judges like Sarah Garrett, Nina Morrison, Natasha Merle of the Legal Defense Fund, Ariana Freeman of the Federal Defenders. These people are under 50 too, most of them. That's how we end up without people who want to erase our history, who thinks white people are too delicate to actually know what the truth of this country is about. We have to vote. It's how we hold on to the law that provides our clients with counsel. It's the only reason we can do some of the work we do in federal court. How many people in this room are going to take an action about voting in 2024? All right, that's a lot. Okay, here's one. How about a difficult conversation with your child or your neighbor or someone in your office? I was at a wedding this past August, beautiful wedding, Bainbridge Island in Washington. You got to go there. And somebody I know comes up to me and says, Ruth, so what about that multiple murder on federal death row, that hate crime? I love the way they think you've never thought about this before. At first I said, Jerry, you gonna make me work? So I put down my glass of wine and I talked to him and I said, you cannot look at one place where you wanna look and from there decide how a system works and think you know who's on death row and think you know how they got there. You can't evaluate the use of the death penalty the way you want to. And I know he heard me because we talked, and we talked. That was one person, that was just one guy I talked to. But we have to have those conversations. We have to. Every little bit that we do may make a difference. And we don't know. For all I know, he's talking to somebody else. Or never speaking again, that's another option. Can we do that? Can everybody have a difficult conversation? Again, if Earlonne can talk to the president, can we talk to somebody, even if it ruins our effing wedding? Raise your hand if you can take a difficult conversation next year. Steve. Finally, if you do that, even if you don't, all of us can give more money. Can you put that thing back up? The Southern Center needs our money. We have it. Other places, people who do, there are no resources for the poor. And there certainly are limited resources for the poor accused of or convicted of crimes. This is never enough. So let's give more next year. We can do that, just even a little bit. Raise your hand if you can give more money. You know, I know who you are. Okay, I'm going to stop where most people begin, and that's with thanks. With a lot of gratitude. I don't know what I'm doing up here, but I have a lot of people to thank. Oh my God. You really should know Kathleen Price. Kathleen speaks truth to power. She has those conversations all the time. And I'm very grateful that you also gave me your friendship. Thank you, Steve Bright, for taking a chance on a law student who came to the office every day in a miniskirt. Women, be yourselves. Where's George Kendall? Where? Okay, there's nobody like George Kendall. Thank you, George Kendall, for your years of vision and for being an incredible support, for all of your encouragement of me constantly. It's a great gift. For Jim Wida, I don't know where the public defenders are. They're the public defenders. Jim is the federal public defender for the District of Maryland. Thank you, Jim, for starting our project, for supporting our project, for being there always, and for the incredible colleagues in your office, because I see what they do every day. I am so lucky I get to actually read emails about people getting out of jail, like constantly. Thank you for being there. Thank you to my 2055 colleagues, one of them is representing, for being there every day and being terrific lawyers, and thank God for having a sense of humor. Mostly thank you to Terrica Ganzy. Thank you to the Southern Center, not for embarrassing me up here, but for the work that you guys do, because I know, I hear about it, I read about it, and I know that people have new lives because of you. And I know it's not Terrica by herself, even though you're pretty amazing, and that is an amazing dress. So once again, can the staffs of the Southern Center stand up? Because these are some awesome people. But finally, I just want to thank, I'm going to thank the people in this room who are my family, and you know exactly who you are. But mostly thanks to all of you for being here today, for knowing that change is possible and doing what you can to make it happen. Maybe in a decade or two, it'll be your student or your child who's standing up and addressing a big hotel room and talking about the incredible changes that you all made to happen. Thank you.
So we've reached the point of the evening where we can all drink, be merry, and go home. But in all seriousness, on behalf of the entire Southern Center for Human Rights, thank each and every one of you for what you have done, what you are doing, what you will continue to do in the name of freedom and justice, because without you, none of this will be possible. So we have a dessert reception in the, the lobby. Please enjoy yourselves, connect with somebody you don't know, and let's build this community together. Thank you all.